Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 12th Education Week Leadership Forum, EdTech 2012, Boosting Student Achievement. We're pleased that you've all come for this interesting and interactive day. These leadership forums are very special events for Education Week and our staff, particularly our reporters. It provides our journalists the opportunity to take their sources, the ones that they've built stories around day in and day out. And for those of you who are regular digital directions readers or readers of Education Week, you're going to recognize some of the folks on stage from the stories you've been reading. We get the chance to put them on stage and make Education Week come alive for you. And today we're going to be able to also do that with our live stream audience. Everybody in the back, turn around and see our live stream. They're coming in from all across the country. Today we bring them some of the most important thinkers in education, many of our key practitioners from around the country, as well as some of Education Week's very best reporters. And the staff here to help you enjoy the panel discussions and keynote chats that you're going to get to experience here on how education technology is going to help improve student achievement. We have very important case studies that we're going to present to you today, opportunities to talk with those people, and that's what these breaks and networking opportunities are for, like your breakfast here, and the refreshment break that we'll have for the morning and the afternoon, as well as a great working lunch that we're looking to share with you all. As you can imagine, we're not able to put on events of this stature and this scope without these sponsors here. These companies come here, and they're located, and you'll see them on the sides of the room here, so I want to encourage you to come visit them throughout the day. They've got their representatives here. They bring innovative solutions that you can use in your district today, this year, and beyond. Joining us today is our digital whiteboard and student response system sponsor, Prometheum. Now, when you all registered today, you received your Active Expressions remote. I hope you'll take the opportunity to use this. This is our opportunity to start one piece of feedback with you. Of course, the other piece of feedback will be encouraging you to interface with our panelists as they discuss the topics of the day. Our Gold Plus sponsor as well is K-12. Thank you to K-12 for sponsoring with us. And our Gold sponsors, Reading Plus and Apangia Math. Lastly, I also want to thank the Nellie Mae Education Foundation for today's virtual event sponsorship. Now, it's with great pride that I'd like to introduce you to today's host, Virginia B. Edwards, Editor-in-Chief of Education Week and the President of Editorial Projects in Education. Everyone, Jenny Edwards.
Good morning. We have an exciting action and information-packed day planned for you around the theme of boosting student achievement with the remarkable array of EdTech tools many of you are already using and some that you would like to use in smart, effective, and innovative ways. I hope you are as excited as the EdWeek team is to delve into today's topics. Sometimes a simple lack of understanding and sometimes it's a lack of awareness results in many school districts missing the opportunity to help students develop 21st century skills and prepare them for college, careers, and beyond. Even as those districts, as the superintendent before me said, have really good intentions and they just layer on the technology onto their educational programs. Plenty of districts, though, are transforming the learning experience through their deployment of interactive technology, like whiteboards, collaborative learning tools, and video technology in the hopes of improving teaching, learning, and school management. But only a relatively few, so far, are getting concrete results where it counts most in improved student achievement. Today, we hope we'll share with you, or I know we'll share with you, and I hope you are able to take home with you some insights into how your districts can achieve similar success. The Education Week Digital Directions team, and I hope today's program provides a clearer understanding of what EdTech can be and how your teachers and students can benefit from it. We've organized 3 keynote conversations. I'll be moderating, or I'll be doing 2 of those. A colleague will be doing another. And we also have 3 panel discussions. So one of the questions we're interested in delving into is which e-learning strategies are the most successful at raising student achievement? Our panelists will provide you with approaches that they think work for low, middle, and high achievers. With innovations come difficult decisions, and you must be asking yourself, how can I make this work in light of tight financial times? We hope to empower you to answer those questions. In one of our panel discussions, the one that comes at mid-morning, 3 of our panelists, Monica Beglau, Jay McPhail, and Darlene Rankin, will address just that issue in building digital curriculum on tight budgets. Constructing a digital curriculum can be expensive, but with advice from Jay, Monica, and Darlene, you will be able to avoid common pitfalls and be well on your way to creating a curriculum that is more interactive and multimedia rich. Now, to be sure, there are many factors that must be considered before a district can expand its use of educational technology. One of the primary concerns is being able to maintain a strong technology infrastructure, even in the face of these tight budget times. Sometimes the hardest part is knowing which programs are working and which ones are not, and being able to eliminate or modify those that are consuming resources you could be putting to better use otherwise. Making smart ed tech decisions will be reviewed in our third panel discussion of the day. But change is hard. That's something I'm going to personally be exploring with panelists, even with the right resources. And it's reasonable to expect that your colleagues and staff will have reservations when it comes to implementing change. Education Week is thrilled to have Will Richardson and Rob Mancabelli with us today to discuss just that. Will and Rob will candidly address the real cause for any concerns you may have and how you can overcome them to fully acknowledge and utilize the benefits of technology. Will has been writing about the intersection of social online learning networks and education for the past 10 years. Through his experiences, he has learned how the use of interactive web tools in the classroom can increase student engagement and expose them to new resources and outlets for expression. He did an interview with one of my colleagues for the Education Week Teacher Professional Development Sourcebook this past spring. And in it, he highlighted the importance of looking at how children collaborate with others on problems, how students can better exercise their critical thinking skills, how they can grow to handle failure, and how they can create effective solutions outside the traditional classroom setting. Rob and Will encourage schools to transform their methods of teaching and learning to reflect the changes in information technology, as well as the new intellectual demands and opportunities that have become a reality as a result of global online networks. And in our closing keynote, Rick Hess, a co-editor of the new book, Customizing Schooling, Beyond Whole School Reform, will address the need for all of us to embrace change. There again is the issue that I'm most interested in pursuing today. Rick is always thought-provoking, as any of you who keep up with his opinion blog on edweek.org know. Rick will address the future of innovation and what it means for educational technology and student accountability, and how you can spread the values of innovation throughout your district. We hope that once you've had the time today to network with your colleagues and to ask questions that keep you up at night, that you will leave here confident enough to implement some of the various approaches you will discover today. Attending today's forum will, we hope, be one more way for you as a school district leader to create a culture of constructive digital learning that enables your students to learn more effectively and reach their full potential. I think you'll come away with a better sense of how these innovations can bring deeper learning to the students in your schools. As you all know, however, the day is here when we can no longer press this issue under the rug of whether technology should be in our schools. Technology holds some very important keys to the future of education, and I know you are here to unlock the doors to success that are available for your students. So let's discover together pathways to boosting student achievement in your districts through the use of technology. I look forward to meeting with you and talking with you throughout the day at EdTech 2012 and beyond. Enjoy the day and feel free to further our conversation through Twitter, as Matthew already said, using the hashtag EdWeekLive. So now I'm segueing into my next role. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to our morning keynote speaker, Greg Gunn. Greg is scary smart. Greg is an entrepreneur in residence at CityLight Capital, a venture capital firm investing in U.S.-based high-growth companies that are dedicated to tackling some of society's toughest challenges. In 2000, he co-founded Wireless Generation, a leading educational software company now serving more than 3 million students with assessment and instructional products. As president of the company, Greg created and led the product development team, shipping the M-Class handheld formative assessment platform. He took over and revamped the company's sales division, landing key state and district sales and tripling the company's revenue in 18 months. As chief scientist, he designed highly effective professional development techniques and created the company's analytics and data mining division, which turned raw data into new insights about student learning progressions. The company was sold to News Corp, you may know, in December 2010. Greg has experience teaching math, physics, and computer science to students from the 4th grade through graduate school. He worked for the Champion International Middle School Partnership, where he developed technology assistant teaching methods for 6th grade math. He recently wrote a blog installment. We had a 7-part blog as something called The Future of School Reform, where he dealt with such topics as how teachers can leverage technology to enhance student engagement. He believes technology can inspire teachers to make the core curriculum more meaningful and change students' educational lives for the better. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Greg Gunn. So Greg, hi, how are you?
Great, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I asked Greg to be a little personal initially and to tell us a little bit about what his path was to get where he is. So why don't you start with, what did you think you wanted to be when you grew up?
So I think I always knew I wanted to be in computers and software. That's something I always knew. But when I was in high school, I actually spent my time, and I actually made my spending money by tutoring kids for their SATs and then also by writing software for local companies. And so from that point on, just teaching, education, and software were always these sort of weird braided things throughout my life.
So, but did you think you were going to be in the classroom for a good part of your career?
No, I didn't expect to. I knew that I enjoyed the teaching process, the tutoring process, but during college I ended up spending a lot of time working with a wide range of kids, largely in math enrichment. But it was as I was getting towards the end of my college program, I was doing a degree in physics. It was time to make the decision to go to graduate school, and I realized I don't like physics that much, but I really like teaching. So I ended up getting a job teaching as a middle school math teacher.
And so you went to Oxford, you were a Rhodes Scholar,
Yep.
And you met Larry Berger there, and you guys had the inkling of what became Wireless Generation.
Yeah, that's right. We got to know each other. We both had a pretty strong interest in both technology and in education. And so we would just hang out a lot and talk about what that meant. Were there interesting things we could build? And this was before the internet. This was just when you have the very early stages. So the first thing we actually built together was a bulletin board system for a camp as an extension of a real camp. But then we sort of kept writing business plans, kept coming up with ideas over the years. And in 2000, while we were working at a web design company, we decided to break out on our own and actually build an educational software company.
And what was the problem you were trying to solve at that point?
We thought about it as an opportunity. So this was in 1999, 2000. One of the interesting things that was happening was in technology generally was that handheld devices were starting to become in wide use. And so you went into any corporate environment and you saw a lot of people carrying around PDAs, Palm Pilots, which was the leading one of the time. And we just got excited about what that technology could do in a classroom environment. Particularly if it was wireless, and this was a little bit before Bluetooth, so there was starting to be talk about, these devices are going to be wireless really soon, and then you'll be able to message to each other, and you'll be able to use it. Teachers can send assignments to kids, kids can send stuff home. So we were excited, and so that's why we started as Wireless Generation. Of course, these devices did not become wireless for quite some time.
So I was going to push on this notion of innovation and change. Don't go to where you are today on that, but what kind of frame did you have back then for how you thought this would, did you think it was bigger than just the device itself, that it would actually help change the culture and, innovate schools in some way?
That's what we hoped, but the ways that unfolded were not the ways that we expected at the time. Going in, we were mostly interested. We thought that the biggest potential for these devices was in supporting the interaction between a teacher and student. So we didn't think about it as sort of another device to go off and play with. We thought of it, and I was particularly coming from a tutoring context. I was like, can we write it would be great to have a piece of software that helps me pick the most diagnostically useful next problem to ask a student, so that I can really accelerate my tutoring process. But we also thought about it as a communications device, so a way to keep the teacher, student, and parent connected. What we didn't realize was that what was going to become exciting out of it was how that communication supported talking about data about a kid. And that's what became interesting.
And say a little more about that, about why you think that's a real lever for change in a school and even beyond that.
Well, early on, for the first year and a half of our company, we built a variety of different applications, and we built them in the context of small consulting contracts with individual schools or districts. So just to keep our business afloat, we were getting these little $5,000, $10,000 contracts to custom build applications for handheld devices for the classroom environment. So we did applications in special education, but we early on did an application in early literacy, which was around, I don't know if you know the process of a running record, which is this early literacy assessment where the teacher is observing what a student is doing and capturing that data, and then analyzing the pattern of students' errors and what they got right in order to understand what the student needs. When we saw that process, we thought that was extremely interesting, because here you had a really high quality diagnostic process, really useful information, but the work you had to do to collect the data, then analyze it, and then interpret it. We thought there was a lot of opportunity to use technology to make that process easier, so those observations would become more useful, and so that teachers routinely could act on it.
So this wasn't so much a station break for wireless as it is the story about Greg, but so what is an entrepreneur in residence? That's what a Greg is now. That's what I want to be.
Yeah, that's what I am now. So I'm an entrepreneur in residence for a venture capital firm called City Light Capital. And essentially what that means is I guide the company's investments in early stage educational technology or education companies. But most of my work is helping these companies figure out how to be successful, how to work effectively in partnership with districts, how to figure out all the things, in a year that I learned over 5 bloody years.
So what are the exciting trends you're seeing in software development and technology development?
I think there are a number of trends that excite me. I think two of the most important single trends are that software is becoming considerably less expensive to build. You can ship an interesting high-quality software application for a tenth of the labor and a tenth of the cost that it took 10 years ago when I was starting wireless, which means a lot more entrepreneurs, smaller teams, entrepreneurs can come in and develop interesting software, and they can get it out faster. The other trend that's exciting to me, though, is because of the ability to connect and communicate more easily, whether it's through email or social networks or Twitter, these very small companies are developing user bases in the thousands very early, very quickly, which means they're able to learn from their users, able to learn from classroom teachers who are using it in real life much more quickly than we were able to, for instance.
So how are people supposed to keep up on this? And this is not a setup for me and what Education Week might do in this space. But how do you expect people to keep up with these developments in the K-12 space?
So there are a couple of things. There are a number of good websites and Twitter feeds that have been emerging, talking about new technologies that are coming out, early stage technologies that are coming out, and so those include websites like startle.org, which is a great resource if you're trying to see what's the latest and greatest coming out. What I'd like to see more of, and what I'm really hoping to see is more information sources that talk about the experiences of people using these technologies in real life. Because the real work of connecting the dots, you see a lot of stuff out there that's basically just hype around new educational technology products. But what's most useful is to hear, yeah, this educational technology product solved these particular problems for us, generated these new challenges for us, and here's how we worked through it. And so I'm looking for more information sources of that type.
And so do you see the kind of dawn of a new era of embracing change and technology as part of that in the K-12 schools now?
So that's interesting to characterize it as a dawn. I don't necessarily see it as a big sudden shift, something discrete. I see a number of important trends that have come together. Schools and school districts have become much more sophisticated in the last 10 years about what they want to do with technology. About what and how to fit it, how to think about technology in the context of instructional goals. And I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir here on that issue, because I know that's what you all spend most of your time thinking about here. So there's that trend of more sophistication around technology buying. But another big trend is more sophisticated use of data. So we have much more discussion about data, use of data, availability of data at different levels, though we still have a lot to learn about how to weave that into a productive flow. And then I think the other thread that's happening, which I think is changing significantly, is that people are starting to think in more expansive ways about how to organize the instructional process. How we use not just technology, but more importantly, how we use people, space, time in different configurations to get the job done.
Well, let's talk about that a little more. What would you say specifically could happen, should happen about how time is used differently?
Yep. So let's take one particular thread of that. One thing that most of us are working on or struggling with, succeeding at, is differentiated instruction. So the process of how do we create more time for more personalized learning, more different kinds of support during the instructional day in a way that's actually manageable, in a way that teachers and administrators can manage and keep track of. And one of the biggest difficulties, that you see in a lot of school contexts is that if we haven't created the freedom to use the schedule differently, then the quote unquote differentiated instruction we want to have ends up trying to happen in these weird little blocks of time that it's not well suited for. And then those initiatives ultimately fail because teachers just can't find enough time in the day, or can't find enough opportunity in the way they're teamed or not teamed to actually do the work of focusing on individual kids. It's a tough problem, but it's also a solvable one.
Well, but how do we solve it, given that there are a lot of policy and regulatory constraints on how time is used, not the least of which is seat time in so many states, mandated seat time?
Yep. So there's part of that question that I sort of will be able to go into, and part of it that I won't really go into. In terms of how to alleviate the policy restrictions and those restraints, those constraints, I'm not going to go into that in much detail because I'm not an expert on that side of getting the work done. But in terms of what kinds of freedom we want to create in our time, that will be useful, that will be productive. So some of the freedoms that matter there are freedom to more flexibility in how we use time for professional development is one big one, I think. There's still a lot of times when we're forced to do professional development in big blocks during a summer, and that professional development ends up being far disconnected from the opportunities to actually use what you learn. So the ability to spread that out is pretty significant. Um, in terms of day-to-day operations, the ability to set aside time in the instructional day for different modes of individualized instruction. So how do we set up small group time? How do we create flexible blocks of time so that if I suddenly find that 4 kids need to reteach or re-experience this particular skill in a different way, I have a time that can happen, and I already have resources available to keep the other kids occupied while I do that.
So how often do you get in schools?
I get in schools pretty regularly. It's if I don't get into schools every couple of weeks, I start to feel suffocated
Twitchy?
and out of touch. Yeah.
So how are you seeing this process of encouraging change playing out and embracing some of these innovative kind of practices?
Well, certainly, I'm seeing it in a lot of crisis situations now. So certainly in a lot of school turnaround situations, people have the opportunity to throw the pieces up in the air a little bit more. So I'm seeing things happen there, in terms of these kind of redesigns or rethinking of how all the pieces fit together. So school turnaround context, which is a crisis context, also seeing it happen in the extreme budget crisis that we're all facing right now. That's forcing people to think, how do I manage to meet the same educational outcomes with 20% or 30% fewer resources? I think that's forcing some dramatic rethinkings of how we use time and space. And then we also see new schools popping up all the time, within districts, alongside districts. And so people starting from scratch who are able to think about how do these pieces come together.
So I personally have a kind of hypothesis that public education, not people in this room, but public education has been kind of slow to transform itself, unlike so many other sectors, including publishing and journalism, which have been so disrupted over the past 12, 15 years. Um, do you feel like that, I'm going to ask it just another way. Do you feel like that is speeding up now, that there is a recognition that education has to change as well?
That's an interesting question. And I'll tell you the way I often think about it is, sometimes we think of the industry as a whole as being slow to change. And that may be true, but it's often the case that individual schools can transform themselves quite quickly if certain elements come together, if a certain leadership or if a new team goal comes together. An individual school can transform quite quickly. So this may seem like a weird analogy, but I almost think of tracking the process as sort of keeping track of microwave popcorn, because you sort of have these poppings of individual schools going through rapid transformations, and to some degree, the change of a district is a whole bunch of those poppings going off. And I think I'm hearing a bigger rate of popping right now.
Do you think the policy context, while you didn't want to talk about what policy changes would be necessary, things like Common Core and these kind of next generation assessments, is that helping the climate of spurring some of the change?
My personal opinion on the Common Core is that it's quite important, and I think it's great that we have these sort of higher, clearer, potentially more valuable standards. But I think what's critically important about them is that they're common. The commonness is key, and I think a lot of the value we're going to see from that is on the product developer side, on the product and service developer side. Because all of a sudden, a new entrant to the market who has an interesting, high-quality instructional experience to offer, tech-based or otherwise, doesn't have to customize it to 50 different environments. And so now I think we're going to be able to accumulate data about which instructional experiences are working against certain standards for certain kinds of kids, And that emergence of the data, we're going to have new ways, we're going to have new efficacy data that we can compare in a much more granular way, in a much more common way, and we'll be able to accumulate it across states. I think that's going to open up a lot.
So talk a little bit, you and I, when we talked beforehand, talked quite a bit about the market, meaning the kind of how people sell into the market, how these IT folks and CIOs and superintendents make these purchasing decisions, and the kind of the good, bad, and ugly of that. Talk a little bit about the market.
Yep. So there are a couple ways to come at that question. I know one of the ones that I spend a lot of time thinking about from my seat is just how can we make, especially when I'm thinking about supporting these relatively young educational technology organizations, how do they partner effectively with districts? And of course, while I was at Wireless, a big part of our work was figuring out how do we do these technology implementations of significant size effectively, and how do we all get on the same page? So one of the important things, and I'll set aside purchasing itself for the moment, which I think is critically important, but just the implementation process. I think companies need to get better at understanding how they're fitting in to the bigger context. So if I'm coming in with an assessment tool, or if I'm coming in with some kind of project management tool, I'm not doing that in isolation. It's happening in a context, and it's got to connect to other things. And so going back to the differentiated instruction example, I see a lot of examples of supplemental product companies that come in there, and they have no idea how they're connecting to other pieces in the curriculum. And so these connection points, how do my assessment results inform my differentiated instruction? How do those decisions get made, and how do I use my curriculum resources to actually do that instruction? Who's making those connections? And you end up finding that a lot of companies, because they don't know the rest of that context, punt on those decisions. And if nobody else is making the decision in the district, then the teacher is the one who has to puzzle out all those connections. And that can be immensely complicated work, immensely complicated work.
Is this the instructional operations perspective you often talk about?
Yeah, it's part of that. It's part of thinking how, so in differentiated instruction, for instance, how do these different pieces come together seamlessly? And I hate the word seamlessly because it's always badly used, but how do these things come together workably so that I know what to do with them every day? So this question of how does the company and the district come together usefully? The company can't get smarter about that unless the district or school opens up about that. And so one difficulty that I see a lot of companies finding themselves in, and I had that experience a lot, was the district feels like it needs to keep a very arm's length relationship from us as a vendor. And I understand why that's true from a purchasing and ethics perspective. But if it also prevents you from having the conversation about what's really going on and being able to bring your vendors to the table to figure out how do we connect these dots usefully, then that becomes a problem.
So do you have
but it's an opportunity.
I was just going to say, do you have an example of where either it's worked well or what it looks like when it works well?
Yeah. So for instance, one place where we had to do a lot of this connecting the dots work was in our work in Chicago public schools. And it took us a while to realize that we had to get a layer deeper of figuring out what's happening with these assessment results afterwards. And so we ended up spending a lot of time with them as a team figuring out, how do we create structures, how do we create guidebooks for how people use these assessment results and then use them to make instructional decisions. And in some ways, it led in some places to different co-development efforts. And so in a lot of places, what we ended up doing as we were setting up professional development was we'd actually sit down and say, okay, this is a professional development that's about assessment, but how do we bring together already written up a list of the relevant instructional resources that teachers have in their classrooms with literally connecting the dots of, if you see this situation, this is the relevant resource. And so we did some of that, but I've seen that in lots of different districts.
And so who tends to be on those teams?
So certainly for instance, in a literacy context, you have to have some of the in-district domain expertise. So whether it's literacy or mathematics, some of the leadership around that, it's best to have, you certainly want to have the companies supplying the various products there. And it is tough to get a room full of companies to play together. I will admit that, but to play well together. But having them together so that you can actually have them in the context when you're figuring out how these pieces come together is pretty important.
We're going to be turning it over to questions, so be thinking about what you would like to ask Greg. But I'm going to do a little lightning round with him and ask him to give us some advice or some insights into what he thinks about the best professional development approaches using technology, what they look like. And you've already alluded to some of the kind of characteristics, but why don't you go ahead and just zero in on PD and what it needs to look like?
Right. So let me start with one of the things I see. One of the interesting trends I'm seeing is that a lot of people in the past have talked about PD in terms of how do I reduce the cost per course, the cost per session, by 20%, 30%, whatever. But I think the bigger question that I think Dr. Nunnery alluded to is how do I get rid of the 50% of PD that doesn't work at all or isn't achieving my goals and replace it with some that does? How do I take the other 50% that seems to be working and help it have more impact? And broadly speaking, even technology aside, there are two main ways that I typically see professional development not achieving its goals. Number one, the PD itself is just too abstract. It's somehow too generalized from the context. And you see this a lot in big idea types of PD, like differentiated instruction, response to intervention. People go through a lot of training. It's abstract at a high level. The teaching team gets back to the school environment. They look at it and say, so now what? And the work to connect the dots is so huge that no action follows off of it. The second way in which PD tends to miss its mark is if it's too disconnected in time from the time it's going to be used. So again, if all the PD is in the summer, but the teacher's not actually going to get the opportunity to use the relevant skill till the spring, just the information loss is enormous. So when I think about trends, technology and otherwise that are solving this, it's about how do we get PD that's more concrete, more contextualized, and bring it closer to the moment that it's going to be used. And some of the things that are happening technology-wise to do that are using videos and other content, but chunking it up into smaller pieces. Thinking of the 6-hour PD session as not your standard unit, but thinking of the 20-minute learnable targeted skill as the relevant unit. And so you see a lot of online resources doing this that have evolved over the years. I think they're getting better at it. But I think there's a lot that we still have to figure out and that individual districts and schools are figuring out about how do we actually make it so that people have the time to use these PD resources over the course of the year. There have been a lot of experiments where people have put up big banks of videos and said, teachers, you can use these whenever you want, but they don't end up getting much usage.
Human nature, right? Just that people are busy.
People are busy, and it's the same in any profession. All of us have PD things out there that we could be using that we greatly underuse. So thinking about, what are the ways in which we can use grade level team relationships, use personal support relationships with the teacher, in some cases use learning networks, so that there's a lot more incentive to actually, use the PD and follow through on it.
I was just going to ask about professional learning communities or social networking.
Yeah.
What's your take on its usefulness?
I think the usefulness, and there are people who are going to speak later today who I think can speak to this probably much more sophisticated way than I can. But I think there's a tremendous amount of promise there, because it's already the case that teachers do most of their learning from other teachers. That's been the case before technology. But the question is, can I use technology to expand the pool to find other people who may not be right nearby me, who are addressing the similar kinds of questions and have found good solutions to.
Do you have a couple of concrete examples of good professional development that uses technology?
Yep. So in terms of the networking piece, I think one long-standing one is the Math Forum, which has been a terrific online network for math teachers for quite a long time, and there's a high amount of communication on that. Now we're seeing a lot more communication through various networks. Edmodo is a sharing infrastructure that a lot of educators are using.
Mm-hmm.
Better Lesson is really about lesson plan sharing, but there's also a lot of conversation that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some interesting pieces we're seeing. What I'm seeing less of so far is sort of the social piece integrated into professional development that is supplied by companies around their products. I'd be interested to see more of that happen.
Huh. And how about educational gaming and its application for curricular kind of objectives?
So educational gaming is something that everybody talks about. We've been talking about for a long time. And I think there are some interesting examples out there. I think the fundamental challenge, though, with educational games, if they're more than just basically direct skill practice type games, like the games we're really interested in are the more exploratory ones. The simulations, the ones where there's more flexibility, more deep learning opportunity. But the real tension is those experiences, you can't guarantee what kind of learning will happen, and you can't guarantee when it will happen. So when a teacher thinks about using those in the context of a course where you're under this day-by-day standards time pressure, it feels like too much risk. So the question becomes, are we going to allow some time in our schedule to take those risks, to use those kind of gaming environments, other kinds of projects where we can't guarantee the outcomes, but there's a possibility of something much more interesting.
And I should ask before that, because it's a much more, relevant, probably to more generalized application, which is hybrid learning and blended learning.
Yeah.
Because that seems like it has the potential to be a true wedge into some of this innovative change that would around time and space and use of resources.
Yep.
Do you agree with that?
I absolutely agree with that. And so just one slice of, so when we're talking about hybrid learning, we're talking about using technologies instructionally that complement the in-school learning process. I think these are absolutely critical. There's such a huge opportunity. I think within a few years, every school will be delivering some of its some of its learning experience from a remote source.
How many people in the audience are parts of districts or schools where hybrid learning is already in effect? Huh. Okay, Greg, Scary Smart Greg, who I really have learned a lot from in the time I have made sure I've crossed paths with him. Questions? We've got mic runners ready to take questions. Here's one in the middle. You've got somebody coming down the aisle. Greg's running. And why don't you tell us who you are and where you're from?
Sure. Alex Garrier from LearnZillion, a new startup. I think of YGen as being very much in tune with educators. I mean, I've seen YGen folks walk into a district and chief academic people like light up, which is rare. So my question is, did you do anything special and specific to get that, or was it just part of your DNA, or how did that happen? If you think it's true.
We worked really, really hard, but I'll tell you a couple of the things that were priorities for us that mattered, and none of them are going to seem like rocket science, but I think they did matter. One was that first of all, we focused on the teacher. Right. Now we build systems that serve all different roles within a school district. But we started off with the teacher, and we started off with we want to help you gather data that will be useful for you in doing your job with the student, and you have to reflect that in every aspect of the design. Because it was clear that teachers are extremely busy people. most managers only have 7 direct reports that they have to get to do the work. Teachers have 25 or 30 direct reports who they have to get to do the work. So incredibly busy professionals. So time was of an essence. So in the product design, you had to think in every interaction that the teacher has with this product, can we take some time and difficulty out of it? And I think we spent, for a small company, we spent more on product design, more of our effort on product design than I think anybody did. And I think teachers saw that in the results. And felt like the products sort of respected their work, respected their time, and respected their goals. So that was key. But as we were growing, it became clear that in a lot of environments, doing the technical implementation was going to be a lot of work, and even more work was going to be helping folks be able to use that data effectively to actually move the needle for kids. And over the years, we ended up expanding our range of services. So we started off with really high quality project management. So if you were a district working with us, you got a lot of support from an account manager and from a technical support team that would really help you get the thing up and running and help you think through all the different aspects of it. It was an expensive model. It's a labor-intensive model, but I think it made the difference. We did some implementations that just would not have been possible and would not have been nearly as successful without that level of support.
Question? Over here, Greg, or Ben's running.
Jay McPhail, Riverside Unified School District. I'm wondering if you're seeing any trends in terms of direct marketing to students, bypassing schools, bypassing the structure.
So that's a great question. I think it's a tremendously important trend. So in terms of offering instructional experiences to kids, I mean, you hear everybody's talking about the Khan Academy and and Sol Khan's resources. I think that's been an enormously valuable experience because it showed that students will actually demand the kind of content and instructional experiences that will be helpful to them. If it's out there, millions of kids will actually hunt these resources down and use them. And that's just one example. When kids want to go learn stuff, they go to YouTube. They go to YouTube and they find videos. If I want to learn how to play, last year I bought an African drum from like a shop when I was on a trip, and I was able to go on YouTube and find 18 hours of lessons on how to play this exotic drum. Right. So when resources out there are available for students and getting easier and easier to find, whether they're individual interest or things that are complementary to what's going on in school, I think we need to consider what that means for what we're doing in the classroom, and consider it an opportunity. But what I hope will happen is that there will be a continuing emergence of these resources. In some cases, an instructional resource will have its fastest adoption among kids directly, and then people will figure out how to package it up for a more structured school context. In some cases, I think it'll be the opposite. But it's traditionally been quite difficult for companies focusing directly on sales to the consumer to be successful in the school space as well because of the difference of those markets. I think this will not be as much of a divide anymore.
Pardon? Is this on? Hi, Kathy Henley, Cinnaminson School District. 2 things you mentioned that I'd like to ask you to connect for me is focus on the teacher and data analysis and collection. We are at a stage in our school district where we really are starting to focus on more on the data collection. We recognize that the teacher collects assessment data minute to minute, day to day, hour to hour, every class.
Yep.
And now we're looking to put them into a defined metric framework. Can you give advice on where to start in that process?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's absolutely critical. So I'll come at it from one slice, and hopefully it'll be useful, and I could tweak if I miss. When you're thinking about structuring data, if you think about it from the standpoint, if you think about it starting from the data and how do we structure this, the problem seems impossibly complicated. If you think about it from the other end, which is, you know, we're going to have the ability to divide these kids up into, you know, 4 different groups for instruction, or we're going to have the opportunity to provide additional work for this number of kids. So I actually don't need to know everything about the data. I need to know how to form 4 groups on a reasonably, you know, reasonably effective and targeted way. That's a more tractable problem, because you can think about, if I'm trying to form these 4 groups, which data are relevant to that? If I need to think about my reteach decision, which data are relevant to that? So one basic piece of advice is, I would say, let's start from what your degrees of freedom are, and then think about how data flows into that. Also think about what kinds of decisions need to be made sort of far in advance, and which ones need to be made on the fly. So for instance, you may have general guidelines for, you know, if we see these certain results in assessment data, then we automatically are going to send kids over to these resources. You know, if we see this pattern in data, we're automatically going to do a reteach with this particular curriculum piece. All right, that may be something you decide in advance, so you don't have to decide on the fly. But then for the on-the-fly decisions, you may say, look, we're not going to create an elaborate data framework around this. What we're going to do is, if we see a situation like this, I'm going to pair 2 teachers up, they're going to talk about it, and they're going to come up with a strategy. So I'm not going to over-prescribe that. In certain situations, I'm just going to put 2 heads together, and 2 people can sort of sort their way through it. So those are a couple of different simplifying ways to think about, you know, what can be an enormously complex problem. Does that sort of make sense? It's a way to start. Okay.
Starting at the beginning, right? There's one behind. We've got time for one more after this one.
Tony Durso, Fredericksburg Academy in Fredericksburg, Virginia. I'm curious if you think that there's an age group, lower, middle, or upper school, that's particularly fertile for investment, one over the other.
Oh.
An age group, you mean in terms of ages of students? Yeah, this is, you know, the short answer is yes. I mean, it's pretty well known and pretty well documented that especially when it comes to intervention or anything we categorize as remediation, earlier is the better. And typically you have a lot more leverage way earlier. And so, for instance, in elementary school contexts, there's always a big pressure within our schools and districts to distribute our resources very evenly. But the fact is, if you can put some extra effort on kindergarten and first grade with kids who are struggling to read, and end up first grade where 90% of them are reading rather than 40% of them are reading, it completely changes the possibilities for resource allocation down the road for those students. So, you know, early grades matter. I think early grades matter for skills development and basic confidence building. In middle school, you have another great opportunity for helping students think differently about their values and goals. So I think that's a different kind of leverage point that's happening while they're in that flux of trying to figure out what maturity means. But like, for instance, one of my favorite schools to look at is in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, North Carolina, and in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District. And they I think made the pretty brave move of taking a lot of their paraprofessionals and additional resources, and rather than spreading them out evenly, they threw them all at kindergarten and first grade, so that they could really so that every kid could get the level of small group and individualized instruction to solve their reading problems. And it's been huge for their results.
And whether that's any connection, but Broad Prize winner this past year, Charlotte Mecklenburg.
Yeah.
Oh God, now we've got more questions. Who had his hand up first? Okay, the avid hand raiser in the back.
I'm Kate Reynolds from the University of New Orleans. My question has to do with the role of teacher preparation programs and leadership programs in leveraging digital learning, and especially when we tend to be on the forefront and then our students go out and don't have access to the things that we've taught them. What should we be doing? And how do we change the minds of those folks out in the schools who are saying, oh, well, we don't do it that way?
Yeah, that's an enormous question. I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in teacher preparation programs. Both long-standing ones and emergent ones. So for instance, USC's Masters of Teaching program is now also delivered through an organization called Tutor, number 2 TOR, which delivers it through a hybrid, mostly online experience, but creates like really new and useful digital assets for the teacher learning, teacher training process that are actually durable. And so students who go through that program will have access to those for a long period of time. One thing that I'm really hoping will solve that connection problem you described, though, is a better, more widely accessible base of supporting content for those training experiences being out there. So if your institution is particularly good at training on classroom management practice, then by all means, package that up into high quality videos and make it available online so that it's an existing resource that those students have. I think it's quite challenging for many districts and many schools individually to create the whole range of PD content that teachers need from scratch. But districts and schools have to do a lot to contextualize that on their end. So I think part of the connection will come as we see more of these high quality resources out there, and that students are having teachers are having access to them during pre-service as well as in service and doing the daily job.
I'd like you all to join me in thanking Greg for being with us today.
Thank you.